For 10 years, my life had a soundtrack, and it was the sound of a key in my front door that wasn't mine. It was Marcus. He never knocked. Not since we were kids, and definitely not since he became a firefighter and started using my couch as his designated crash pad between impossible shifts and bad dates. My apartment was his neutral ground, a place devoid of smoke alarms and expectations. And for 10 years, I had perfected the art of pretending that the frantic thunder of my heart every time he walked in was just normal, a platonic arrhythmia. My own life was quiet. I worked from home as a graphic designer, my days governed by the hum of my computer and the precise clicks of a mouse. My world was pixels and Pantone colors, a controllable universe of straight lines and perfect gradients. Marcus's world was chaos and heat, sirens and ash. He brought the scent of it with him, a ghost of wood smoke and sweat that clung to his clothes and settled into the fibers of my sofa. I told myself I hated the smell. I lied. The current arrangement, however, was different. It wasn't a one-night crash after a 24-hour shift. His girlfriend, a woman whose name I could never seem to remember, had finally kicked him out. The reason was as predictable as it was cliché: his job. The long hours, the last-minute calls, the emotional wall he built around himself after a bad run. So he'd shown up on my doorstep 3 weeks ago with 2 duffel bags and the same apologetic, tired look he'd worn since we were teenagers getting into trouble. "Just for a bit, Leo," he'd mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. "Just till I find a place." I'd just nodded and taken one of the bags. Of course, there was never any other answer when it came to Marcus. My spare room, which had been a sad little office full of dusty canvases and forgotten projects, was now his. And my carefully curated, quiet life was now filled with the sound of his heavy boots on the hardwood, the deep timbre of his voice on the phone with his captain, and the impossibly loud sound of his breathing from the room next to mine in the dead of night. It was a special kind of torture, this proximity. Before, his presence was a fleeting storm. Now, it was the climate. I learned the new rhythm of his life. The way he'd stand under the shower for 20 minutes after a shift, as if trying to wash away more than just the grime. The way he made coffee, strong and black, and would leave the mug on the counter for me in the morning before he left for the station. Small, domestic acts that felt like tiny, sharp cuts against the thin skin of my composure. I spent most of my time observing him when he didn't think I was looking. I watched the corded muscles in his forearms as he cleaned and oiled his work boots at the kitchen table, his movements methodical and sure. I saw the faint, silvery scars that crisscrossed his hands, each one a story he never told. He had a way of holding himself, a solid, grounded presence that made my small apartment feel safer, fuller, and more dangerous. So much more dangerous. He was a man of quiet actions. Words were difficult for him, especially emotional ones. He showed he cared by fixing the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months, or by bringing home pizza on a Friday night without asking, just knowing I'd be too drained to cook. He'd sit on the couch, feet up on my coffee table, and watch some mindless action movie, and the simple, solid weight of him there, in my space, was enough to make my chest ache with a feeling that was too big for friendship. My internal monologue was a relentless cycle of analysis. When he brushed his hand against my back as he squeezed past me in the hallway, was it just incidental contact? Or did his fingers linger for a fraction of a second too long? When he smiled at something I said, a real smile that reached his tired gray eyes, was it just the easy affection of a lifelong friend? Or was there something else in that gaze, something deeper I was too afraid to name? I was a detective in the case of my own heart, and every clue was ambiguous, every piece of evidence circumstantial. One evening, about a week into his stay, the tension coiled a little tighter. He was sitting on the floor, leaning against the sofa while I sat on the cushions above him, both of us watching some documentary about deep-sea creatures. It was late, the only light in the room coming from the television's blue glow. I could smell the clean, soapy scent of his skin from his recent shower. He shifted, and the back of his head brushed against my knee. A jolt, electric and sharp, shot through me. He didn't pull away. He just settled, a quiet sigh leaving his lips as his head rested gently against my leg. It was nothing. It was everything. My entire body went rigid. I am a statue. I am a piece of furniture. I am not a man who has been secretly in love with his best friend since he was 17. My breath hitched, and I forced myself to focus on the giant squid on the screen, its alien form moving through the dark water. But all I could feel was the warmth of him, the solid weight of his skull against my knee, the soft texture of his short hair. A universe of unspoken things existed in that single point of contact. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't move. I wouldn't have moved if the building was on fire. He broke the silence, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through me. Her problem, he said, out of nowhere, was that she wanted me to talk about it. I knew who she was. About work? I managed, my own voice sounding strained. Yeah, he shifted again, just a fraction. She wanted details. The bad calls. She thought if I talked about it, it would fix me. I didn't say anything. I just listened. It doesn't work like that, he continued, his voice rough with something I couldn't identify. Talking about it just makes it real again. Puts the pictures back in your head. The sounds. The smells. He paused. You never ask. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. An observation. I figure you'll tell me if you want to, I said softly. He was quiet for a long moment. The warmth of his head against my knee was a constant, burning reminder of the line we were blurring. Then he said, thanks. Just that. One word. But it felt heavier than a whole conversation. It was an acknowledgement of the space I gave him, the silent understanding that had always been the foundation of our friendship. He knew I saw the shadows behind his eyes after a tough shift. He knew I didn't need the gory details to understand the weight he carried. And in that moment, with his head resting against me in the dark, it felt like he was finally letting me help him carry it, just a little. The next day, he was gone before I woke up, but the dent in the sofa cushion was still there, and the memory of his warmth was seared into my skin. The dynamic had shifted. The air between us was now charged with the ghost of that vulnerability. The casual touches didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent. A hand on my shoulder as he looked over my screen at a design I was working on. His arm brushing mine as we stood side by side at the stove. Each touch was a spark on dry tinder, and I was terrified of the inevitable inferno. The shared experiences, the small intimacies of cohabitation, began to pile up, each one a brick in a wall that was either building between us or building around us. I couldn't tell which. One Saturday, we tackled the disaster area that was my balcony. It was a small, sad space, home to a few dead plants and a rusty bistro set. Marcus, in a fit of productive energy, decided it was our project for the day. We spent hours out there, sweeping away dead leaves, scrubbing the concrete, and assembling a new set of chairs he insisted on buying. We worked in a comfortable, easy rhythm, a dance we'd known our whole lives. I'd hold the screw, he'd work the Allen key. I'd pass him a rag, he'd wipe down a rail. We didn't need to talk much. We were fluent in the language of shared tasks. At one point, he was trying to attach a stubborn leg to one of the new chairs, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was on his knees, his back to me. The fabric of his gray t-shirt was stretched taut across his broad shoulders, revealing the powerful musculature underneath. I found myself just watching, the way the sun caught the gold flecks in his brown hair, the focused set of his jaw, the sheer, unapologetic physicality of him. He was built to withstand pressure, to break down doors, to carry people from burning buildings. He was built to be strong. Leo, can you hold this steady? He asked, grunting with effort. I knelt behind him, my knees brushing the backs of his thighs. I placed my hands on the chair frame, my fingers just inches from his. The heat coming off his body was palpable, a furnace of contained energy. I could smell the sun on his skin, mixed with the faint, clean scent of his laundry detergent. My heart was doing that stupid, frantic thing again. He pushed, the bolt finally sliding into place. Got it, he said, breathing a sigh of relief. He started to turn, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to turn right into me. Our faces would be inches apart. He would see it. He would see the decade of longing I tried so hard to hide. But he just shifted to sit back on his heels, his shoulder bumping against mine. Teamwork, he said, with a tired grin. Yeah, I breathed out. Teamwork. That night, the breakthrough I hadn't even realized I was waiting for happened in the quietest way imaginable. He was unusually subdued at dinner, picking at the takeout I'd bought. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. He looked haunted. We were cleaning up in the kitchen, the small space forcing us into a constant dance of apology and proximity. You okay? I asked, keeping my voice casual as I rinsed a plate. He was leaning against the counter, staring at nothing. We lost one today, he said, his voice flat, hollowed out. A kid. House fire. We were too late. The plate slipped from my fingers, clattering into the sink. I turned to face him. His face was a mask of exhaustion, but his eyes were shattered. All the strength I'd admired that afternoon was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping vulnerability. This was the part he never talked about, the part he tried to shower off. I didn't know what to say. The usual platitudes felt cheap and insulting. So I said nothing. I just closed the small distance between us, took the damp dish towel from his hand, and did the only thing that felt right. I wrapped my arms around him. For a moment, he was completely still, rigid as stone. I thought I'd made a terrible mistake. My mind screamed at me to let go, to apologize, to retreat back to the safety of our unspoken rules. But then, slowly, tentatively, his arms came around me. He didn't hug me back with force. He just sagged. His head dropped onto my shoulder, and I could feel the tremor that ran through his entire body. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, and I held him. I held the strongest man I knew as he quietly, almost imperceptibly, fell apart in my arms. His breathing was ragged against my skin. I could feel the dampness of tears, and it broke my heart. I just stood there, my hand rubbing slow, steady circles on his back, anchoring him. He smelled of smoke and grief. We stood like that for a long time, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and our own unsteady breaths. He wasn't Marcus the firefighter. He was just Marcus, and he had let me in. He had let me see the cracks in his armor, the man underneath the uniform. It was the most profound intimacy I had ever experienced, more real and more devastating than any kiss I had ever imagined. When he finally pulled back, he didn't look at me. He just nodded, a jerky, grateful movement, and walked out of the kitchen and into his room, closing the door softly behind him. I stood there for a long time, my arms still feeling the phantom weight of him, my neck still feeling the ghost of his tears. The air in the apartment was different now. Something had been broken open. The unspoken had been given a voice, not in words, but in a desperate, clinging embrace. There was no going back to the way things were. The days that followed were thick with a new kind of tension. It wasn't the anxious, will who won't he pining of before. It was something heavier, more knowing. The subtext of every interaction was now screamingly loud. We avoided talking about the hug in the kitchen, but it was always there, a silent third occupant in the room. He started seeking me out more. He'd bring his laptop into my office and work on shift schedules while I designed logos, the quiet tapping of our keyboards a strange kind of duet. He'd wait for me to finish work so we could eat together. We were orbiting each other closer and closer, the gravitational pull between us becoming impossible to ignore. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the wind was picking up. The tipping point came on a Thursday night. It had been a long, frustrating day for both of us. My client had rejected 3 rounds of designs, and he had been stuck at the station doing endless, mind-numbing inventory. We were both irritable and restless. To break the mood, I suggested we go for a drive. We ended up at a scenic overlook, a place we used to go as kids to escape our parents. The city glittered below us, a sprawling galaxy of distant lights. We sat on the hood of his truck, the metal still warm from the engine, a 6-pack of beer between us. For a while, we just drank in silence, listening to the crickets and the far-off hum of traffic. "Do you ever think about just leaving?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Starting over somewhere else? Someplace quiet." The question surprised me. Marcus was the most rooted person I knew. His whole identity was tied to this city, to his station, to his family. Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't know what I'd be running to. Maybe not running to, he mused, taking a long pull from his beer. Maybe just running from. He turned his head, his gray eyes catching the faint starlight. He was looking at me, really looking at me, with an intensity that made the air thin in my lungs. "What are you running from, Leo?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. The loaded question. The confrontation disguised as philosophy. He wasn't just asking about the city. I am running from this. From this exact moment. From the terrifying hope that is blooming in my chest. From the way your eyes make me feel seen for the first time in my life. The usual, I guess. I deflected, my voice betraying my nerves. Loneliness. The The feeling that I'm missing out on something. His gaze didn't waver. Are you lonely? He asked, his voice dropping lower. It was so direct, so perceptive. He was cutting through all my defenses. I swallow. I can't lie to him. Not now. Yeah. I whisper, the admission feeling like a surrender. Sometimes. He held my gaze for another long moment, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Understanding, maybe even recognition. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray piece of hair from my forehead. His touch was feather-light, but it burned a trail across my skin. It was a gesture so tender, so far outside the bounds of our usual friendship, that it felt like a confession in itself. My breath caught in my throat. The space between us crackled. It was a live wire, and we were both holding on. He didn't pull his hand away. He let it rest for a second against my temple, his thumb stroking my skin once, a slow, deliberate motion. Then he dropped his hand, cleared his throat, and looked back out at the city lights. The moment was over. But it had happened. It was real. He had touched me with an unmistakable gentleness, an intimacy that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with something else. Something new and fragile and terrifying. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive home, but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with everything we hadn't said, everything his touch had implied. The next 24 hours were an exercise in exquisite agony. We were polite. We were careful. We moved around each other like two people who had seen the other naked for the first time, unsure of the new rules of engagement. I was convinced I had imagined it, that I had projected all my own desperate wanting onto a simple, friendly gesture. I retreated back into my head, my anxiety a buzzing swarm of bees. He left for his shift early the next morning. The apartment felt cavernous and silent without him. I tried to work, but I just stared at the screen, replaying the moment at the overlook again and again. The feel of his thumb against my temple was a phantom limb, a sensation I couldn't shake. I was losing my mind. The day bled into night. A storm rolled in, the sky turning a bruised purple. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rattled the building. It felt appropriate, a reflection of the turmoil inside me. I made dinner and didn't eat it. I put on a movie and didn't watch it. I was just waiting. For what? I didn't know. For him to come home. For the other shoe to drop. It was after midnight when I finally heard it. The sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. The key in the lock. I sat up on the couch, my muscles tense. The door opened, and he filled the frame, silhouetted for a moment against the flashing lightning outside. He looked like he had walked through hell and back. His face was smeared with soot. His hair was damp and matted with sweat. His turnout coat, slung over one arm, dripped rainwater and something that smelled acrid and chemical onto the floor. He looked utterly, profoundly depleted. Beaten. He kicked the door shut behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet apartment. He didn't seem to notice me at first. He just stood there in the entryway, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the floor. He let his gear fall. The heavy coat, the helmet, the boots. They hit the hardwood with a series of dull, exhausted thuds. The sound of a warrior laying down his arms. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes found me in the dim light of the living room. They were hollowed out, empty of everything but a bone-deep weariness that seemed to radiate from him in waves. He looked older than he had that morning. He looked broken. He took a slow, shuffling step towards me. Then another. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of the couch, looming over me. The smell of smoke was overwhelming, so thick I could taste it. My heart is a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. What is happening? Is he hurt? Is he angry? He just stood there, swaying slightly, looking down at me. His chest rose and fell with a ragged breath. And then he spoke, his voice a raw, wrecked whisper that was almost lost to the sound of the rain. I held a man while he died today, Leo, he rasped. I held him. For 20 minutes. Waiting for the ambo. It was my turn. He paused, swallowing hard, his throat working. My turn to hold him. He stared at me, and in his eyes, I saw the full, unvarnished horror of his day. I saw the ghosts he carried. I saw the weight that had finally become too much to bear alone. And then he said the words that shattered my world and put it back together all at once. Your turn to hold me. It wasn't a request. It was a plea, a surrender, a confession of need so profound it stripped away a decade of friendship and pretense and left only the raw, undeniable truth. I didn't think. I just moved. I surged to my feet, my hands coming up to cup his soot-stained face. He leaned into my touch, a shudder running through his powerful frame. His eyes fluttered shut. He was giving me all of his weight, all of his pain, all of his trust. And I kissed him. It wasn't gentle or tender like the touch at the Overlook. It was desperate. It was urgent. It was messy, tasting of ash and rain and salt. It was a kiss that said everything we had never been able to say. It was 10 years of unspoken longing, of silent observation, of aching friendship that was always something more. His arms came around me, pulling me tight against his body, and I could feel the frantic, exhausted beat of his heart against mine. He kissed me back with a raw, hungry need that mirrored my own. This was not for show. This was not a moment of comfort. This was a breaking point. This was real. We broke apart, breathless, pressing our foreheads together. His hands were tangled in my hair. Mine were still cradling his face. The air between us was electric, humming with the aftershock of what we'd just done. "Leo," he breathed, his voice thick. "I'm here," I whispered. "I've got you." I led him to the bathroom, and wordlessly, I helped him. I turned on the shower, the steam filling the small room. I helped him out of his smoky, damp clothes, my fingers clumsy. He was pliant, letting me guide him, his exhaustion so complete he could barely stand. I pushed him gently into the shower and watched as the water sluiced the grime and the grief from his skin, swirling down the drain in gray rivers. I just stood there, a silent guardian, until the water ran clear. When he came out, wrapped in a towel, he looked scrubbed raw, but the hollowness in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet vulnerability. I led him to my room. Not his room. Mine. I pulled back the covers of my bed, and he crawled in without a word. I slipped in beside him, and he immediately turned, wrapping an arm around my waist and burying his face in my chest. I held him, my arms around his shoulders, my cheek resting on the top of his damp head. He smelled of my soap now. He smelled like he belonged here. He was asleep in minutes, his breathing finally evening out into a deep, peaceful rhythm. But I lay awake for hours, listening to the rain and the steady beat of his heart against my ribs. I held him. It was my turn, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I never wanted to let him go. I woke to the pale, gray light of a post-storm morning. For a disoriented second, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt the heavy weight of an arm across my waist and the warmth of a body pressed against my back. It all came rushing back. Marcus, the kiss, the shower, the bed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I lay perfectly still, my eyes wide open, staring at the wall. What have I done? What have we done? He was grieving, exhausted, not in his right mind. I took advantage of him. He's going to wake up and regret this. He's going to leave. The familiar litany of my own insecurity started its morning chant. Slowly, carefully, I tried to untangle myself from his hold. I needed to escape, to put some distance between us before he woke up and the crushing awkwardness descended. But the moment I moved, the arm around my waist tightened, pulling me back against him. "Don't," a sleepy voice rumbled, the sound vibrating right through my back. I froze. "Marcus." He shifted, pressing his face into the space between my shoulder blades. "Stay," he mumbled into my shirt. So I stayed. I lay there, my heart thudding a nervous rhythm, as the sun rose higher, casting brighter stripes of light across the room. He didn't say anything else, and neither did I. We just lay there, tangled together in the quiet morning, his breath warm on my neck. The silence wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, settled. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stirred, loosening his grip. I took the opportunity and slipped out of bed, my feet cold on the wood floor. I didn't look at him. I just grabbed a t-shirt and fled to the kitchen, my mind racing. I needed a task. I needed to do something normal. Coffee. Normal people make coffee. My hands were shaking as I scooped the grounds into the filter. I could feel his presence before I heard him. I turned, and he was leaning in the doorway, wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants that were too short on him. His hair was a mess, and his face was creased from the pillow. He looked soft. He looked like mine. We stared at each other across the kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken questions. He broke the silence first. "Leo, I'm making coffee," I said, my voice too bright, too false. He walked towards me, stopping just a few feet away. He looked tired, but the haunted expression was gone. He just looked calm. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his messy hair. "Last night," he started, and my stomach plummeted. "Here it comes. The apology. That it was a mistake." "You don't have to say anything." I cut in, turning back to the coffee maker, unable to watch his face. "You were exhausted. It was a bad day. I get it. We can just forget it." "No." The word was quiet but firm. It stopped me cold. I turned back to him. "I don't want to forget it," he said, his gaze steady and clear. He took another step, closing the remaining distance between us. He reached out and took my hand, his calloused fingers lacing through mine. His touch was warm and sure. I woke up this morning, and for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. My breath hitched. Safe. He felt safe with me. "Leo," he said, his voice softer now. "I'm not good with words. You know that. I spend my whole life running into fires, and this." He squeezed my hand. "This is the scariest thing I've ever done." "Me too," I whispered. A small smile touched his lips. Yeah. He brought my hand up to his mouth and pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. It was a gesture of such profound tenderness it made my knees weak. "I don't know what we're doing," he admitted, his eyes searching mine. "But I don't want to go back to the way things were." Relief washed over me, so potent it felt like I could finally breathe again after 10 years of holding my breath. "Okay," I said, a real smile finally breaking through. "Okay." He didn't need to say anything else. We didn't need a grand declaration. This was our language, a quiet understanding, a shared choice. The coffee maker gurgled, finishing its cycle. We stood there for another minute, hands intertwined, in the sun-drenched kitchen. The world outside, with its fires and its deadlines, felt a million miles away. All that mattered was the solid weight of his hand in mine. Later that day, we sat on the balcony we had fixed together, drinking our coffee from matching mugs. The air was clean after the storm. The city seemed quieter. He was telling me a stupid story about a prank they'd pulled on a rookie at the station, and I was laughing, a real, uncomplicated laugh. He reached over and brushed his thumb across my cheek, a simple, easy gesture that was no longer ambiguous. It was just us. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw not just the hero, the stoic protector, but the man who felt safe in my arms. The man who chose my bed, my coffee, my quiet life. And I realized my own quiet life wasn't empty. It was just waiting. It had been waiting for him to come home. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a beginning. Messy and uncertain and terrifyingly real. But as he smiled at me over the rim of his coffee cup, his gray eyes clear and full of a quiet promise, I knew I was no longer an observer in my own life. I was finally a participant, and I was home.